Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Now, look, I know it's been a little bit since I have produced content. I have not disappeared. I am still here. I am still around. And today is today. Today is today. I sound like Kamala Harris, don't I? That is just... I'm a little rusty right now. I'm a little rusty, I would have to say. So forgive the Kamala Harris impersonation. Yeah, anyway. All right, what are we looking at today? What are we talking about today? Well, obviously, the big news is the possible military strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Yes, in all probability, the United States will launch a series of attacks against Iran for a variety of reasons, which you may or may not agree with. And then obviously the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces continues unabated. Obviously. Now look, before I get into the crux of what we're talking about today, in terms of what is happening in Iran and what could happen and what is this going to look like if the United States does launch additional attacks? Have the Iranians been holding back? Are the Iranians trying to not escalate? We'll get into that in a second. But first, no, this is not a word from our sponsors. I tend to watch other content providers, and some of those content providers obviously have to do with current events and military type issues and so forth and so on. And I have often mentioned, as we go into our discussions, what I would call the uninformed urbanite. The uninformed urbanite. You also have the uninformed suburbanite and the uninformed rural person. They exist. They do exist. And it, unfortunately, is not always necessarily the fault of that person who just doesn't always understand, especially history. Now, what I'm taking issue with right now, in terms of something I noticed, and it's really not that big of a deal. It's not. It's not a huge deal, right? But let's say you are a content provider and you are speaking to millions upon millions of people. I mean, you are a very popular content provider and you have millions of people in your audience that you're watching. Now, I'm really hesitant about saying the name of this content provider because I respect him. I do. I respect his history. I respect his service to the country. I respect his views that he has. But again, when you are of a level that he is on, and when you're going on the Joe Rogan podcast and you are talking to key leadership officials of the United States government, and in all probability you have the ear maybe of the president of the United States. Maybe not the ear, but maybe the president has actually listened to you, right? So again, you're talking a person who has millions of people watching his program, and this individual, and I think when I say essentially the synopsis of what they were talking about, you are immediately going to know who I am, who I'm talking about. But recently on his podcast, and he's predominantly on Spotify, and he had an expert. Well, I don't want to say an expert. He is very knowledgeable about the Roman Empire, about the history of the Roman Empire. I would say very knowledgeable, not necessarily a subject matter expert in terms of a true, maybe, professor of history, right? But again, still very, very knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than the average person, more knowledgeable than myself, okay? And he was on this podcast talking to this individual. This individual is a former Navy SEAL, okay? True warrior, has somewhat of an understanding of a little bit of military history, probably not as much as he should, given his audience, and not just his audience, the size and scope of his audience. But what I'm going to say will make more sense here as we continue. But he was discussing with this content provider, or the Roman history semi-expert, was having this discussion with this content provider, and he brought up the historian. We'll just call him the historian. Brought up the concept of the Roman Praetorian Guard. The Roman Praetorian Guard. Now, I would say if you read any military history, if you are even slightly versed in military history, you are going to know who the Praetorian Guard is, right? I would say most of the people listening to this program know what the Praetorian Guard was. To that effect, I'm not even going to explain to you what the Praetorian Guard is, because I do believe most people listening to this program understand and know who the Praetorian Guard was of ancient Rome, both Republic and post-Republic times, going back to Augusta. So during this program, this content provider was essentially introduced to the Praetorian Guard. And unfortunately, this content provider, this former Navy SEAL, had no concept of the Praetorian Guard. He did not know what the Praetorian Guard was. Now look, if you are producing a program and most of your listeners know that you're a Navy SEAL and you're a contract warrior as well, meaning when he got out of the U.S. military, he proceeded over to do some contract work for the United States government, kinetic type contract work. But again, it's really difficult, at least for me, to get my head around that this content provider just not only did not know what the Praetorian Guard was, I mean, even just before you were to have maybe a person on your show, I would say do a little due diligence. And if you're going to be talking about ancient Rome, and you're going to compare and contrast maybe ancient Rome to present day United States and what's happening in the United States, maybe learn a little bit more about ancient Rome, about the Roman military. And if you delve into the Roman military, you are of course going to get into the weeds of the Praetorian Guard. And quite frankly, I enjoy this guy's program. I really do. And I admire him. And and then when he's asked, are you familiar with the Praetorian Guard? And obviously he wasn't at all. And it took a bit even for him to, and I'm not even sure towards the end of the program that he was putting two and two together in terms of Praetorian Guard equals military unit that protected the current regime in power, the Caesar at the time, or Caesars. Because some of the comments that he was making, he was comparing and contrasting the Praetorian Guard to the Supreme Court, and I don't think he was initially getting that it was an actual military unit. He was somehow, and again, I don't think the historian in defense of the content provider was really giving the content provider the key background of the Praetorian Guard, how it was created, what purpose it served, acknowledge that it was a military unit, and then proceed from there. That never really happened. He just discussed Praetorian Guard, and as he was talking about it, the content provider associated it with the Supreme Court. It was really, really kind of bizarre, and again, not to knock the content provider. Well, I guess I am, and it's just something that he probably should have polished himself up on prior to having that guy on the podcast, if you're going to talk about that sort of thing, and especially something as widely known and understood as the Praetorian Guard. And at one point, the historian post comment about the Supreme Court, called it a cross between the Secret Service and the FBI, which that's something you can't even. I mean, I guess if you're trying to talk to a layman who has absolutely no idea or understands what you're essentially trying to explain or describe, maybe. But again, if you have that many followers, right, and you have that kind of platform, millions of people, man, come on, you gotta know who the Praetorian Guard is. You can't go into and look, consider this constructive criticism, okay? You can't go into an interview, a conversation, and not understand the Praetorian Guard. I think that if the historian would have said, hey, the Praetorian Guard was a lot like the special Republican Guard that protected Saddam Hussein, or the Republican Guard that protected the Assad regime of Syria, that may have helped the content provider more to kind of gain an understanding of what he was talking about, because he wasn't even in the ballpark of really understanding what the Republican Guard is. And again, unfortunately, this is the time that we are living in right now. That was something that I learned in grade school, right? In history class. I'm guessing you, the listener, probably the same. He's a lot younger than me, the content provider. So I don't know. It's difficult to say. But again, kind of embarrassing. Kind of, me listening to the program, I really felt bad for him and said, hey man, you need to get debriefed before you have these guys on the program, and you should just verse yourself a little bit, obtain a little bit of baseline knowledge about the history of ancient Rome, its military structure, and so forth and so on. And I don't want that individual to look like a village idiot, but that's the way he came across. Now, if I were to have a person on the program, on this program, or I was having a conversation with someone who was discussing physics or some other advanced subject I had no idea about, then it would probably look very much the same. That's why you have to kind of prepare yourself a little bit. Anyway, just wanted to touch on that a little bit. And again, very popular podcaster, millions of people, and boy, I was just like, wow. Anyway, all right, so let's get back over to Iran. Now, is the United States going to launch a military operation against Iran? I mean, do we even know at this point? Because I don't even think the mainstream media or even military analysts that come on the mainstream media really don't understand what is going to happen and what, let's say, the aim points and the targeting list is even going to look like. It seems like that the U.S. is going to go after both the Iranian nuclear program again. It is going to target military assets, and it's going to target regime security assets. That's what, right now, it seems the United States is preparing to do. It's preparing to go after the assets and the targets that keep the Ayatollahs, this Islamic theocracy, in power. And that includes, obviously, the Revolutionary Guard and other targets as well. It seems during the previous set of strikes, the U.S. and to an extent the Israelis did not necessarily go after the Iranian military. Okay, you have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, maybe like the Praetorian Guard. And then you have the Army, you have the Navy, you have the Iranian Air Force. Now, the Revolutionary Guard also has naval assets, it has air assets, it has large ground assets, it has paramilitary assets that is designed, and it's called the Revolutionary Guard, to protect the revolutionary Islamic government that took power many, many years ago. That's why it's called the Revolutionary Guard. Now, obviously, the U.S. will target the Revolutionary Guard. I have a feeling that we could see the U.S. Target the naval capability of Iran as well. It looks like Iran is preparing to escalate the conflict in the form of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. You're looking at right now, right here, the Strait of Hormuz. There is a vast amount of shipping that transits through the Gulf of Oman, through the Strait of Hormuz, and into the Persian Gulf, where those vessels then pick up petroleum products. The stuff that makes the world go round. Now, unlike during prior strikes where we saw the Iranians launch massive amounts of ballistic missiles and drones towards the Israelis, we did not see an attempt by Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. As we speak, within the last 48 hours, Iranian forces have conducted exercises in which they shut down a portion of the Strait of Hormuz and conducted military exercises designed to show that they have that capability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if and when, and it looks very much likely like the United States is going to launch a series of strikes against Iran, that it is possible that Iran will then attempt to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It's also likely that the Iranians will attempt to fire more ballistic missiles at Israel and military bases in Gulf nation states that house and allow U.S. forces to launch aircraft, such as Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, maybe not Saudi Arabia, maybe not. Forgive me, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold right now. It's just trying to set in, and I am fighting it right now. But it does look like it's going to happen. It does look like the U.S. is moving quite a bit of assets into the region. We have a carrier right now in the Arabian Sea. We have another aircraft carrier near Cyprus. We have other assets that have been moved. We have aircraft refueling assets that have been moved into the region, lots of those. We have F-22s, we have F-35s, we have F-15 Strike Eagles, we have and always have had B-52 and B-2 capability as well. But a very robust capability has moved into the region with an immense amount of firepower to launch protracted strikes against targets inside of Iran. But what happens and how this proceeds really is going to be up to Iran. If Iran escalates this, and I have a feeling they might. I mean, if I was Iran and I was being attacked at a certain point, you have to reestablish yourself in terms of not allowing yourself to be victimized, right? You have to do that. You have to. And what is that going to look like? Victimize is probably a incorrect term. I would say that Iran will have to try to reestablish some form of deterrence. Right now, unfortunately for the Iranians, they don't really have a lot of deterrence. Meaning, if we were to go back prior to the Israeli strikes on Iran, and even before that, with the engagements of Hezbollah and the attempted previous strikes by Iran on Israeli targets, the Iranian capability that was anticipated and feared did not materialize. So right now, in terms of seeking a military goal, or even a political goal that turns into a military goal, the Iranians don't have much to offer up in terms of deterrence. Meaning, if we strike an Iranian target, do the Iranians have the capability to penalize that nation state who launches that attack in a manner that that other nation state, be it the Israelis or the United States, would not want to strike the Iranians again? And right now, at least in the political realm of the United States, the body politic, the political leadership, does not believe Iran is a real threat. I believe the military, the U.S. military, is not 100% sold on that. Meaning that from their position, they still see the Iranians as having a credible capability that has not yet been utilized. And again, part of that is going to be the shutting down or attempting to shut down parts of the Straits of Hormuz, or going after Gulf shipping, trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Now, in all likelihood, if that happens, we're going to see a rehatch of the 1980s Operation Praying Mantis. You guys remember that? Ronald Reagan, late 80s, Operation Praying Mantis, where the United States essentially destroyed the entire Iranian Navy in about 6 hours. Yeah, a very large military operation that at the time that it happened, I don't think people really understood just how big Praying Mantis was. Pretty big operation, and did a lot of damage to the Iranian naval capability. But right now, we're in all probability looking at a military operation that's going to be much bigger than Praying Mantis. It'll be, in all probability, bigger than Operation Midnight Hammer and the 12-day series of strikes, or it could be smaller. It's difficult to say, but again, a lot of what happens is going to be contingent upon what the Iranians do and how the Iranians respond. If the Iranians respond harshly, and if somehow they are able to bring down an American aircraft, or they are able to strike an American ship, this could get nasty pretty quick in terms of it possibly expanding and lasting longer in terms of a military conflict. But as of right now, if we go back to Operation Midnight Hammer, the Iranians were not able to bring down nothing. They were not able to bring down an Israeli aircraft. They were not able to bring down an American aircraft. The American Air Force and the Israeli Air Force essentially operated with impunity over Iran. Now, there's been talk that the Russians and possibly the Chinese have brought in additional systems to help the Iranians out. The United States has learned a lot from the ongoing war in the Ukraine about Russian air defense capability. Right now, the United States has learned much, much more in terms of Russian air defense capability than the Russians understand about U.S. offensive strike capability. So we'll see what happens. We will certainly see what happens. The Chinese could add another dimension to this. The Chinese technology, in some cases, is more advanced than Russian technology. We understand that the Chinese have brought in additional air defense systems. The Chinese have possibly brought in additional anti-ship assets as well. So this could become interesting. But in all likelihood, again, the Iranians are just vastly outmatched, and some of these other nation states that we would define as near peer adversaries, unless we're in a total war type scenario. Even those folks really have a hard time grasping the capability that exists with the United States right now in terms of what they're able to do, especially in a smaller, short-term, high-intensity operations, such as you'll see in these strikes against the Iranians. Now, that's not to say we could see some sort of surprise, possibly, but again, ultimately, time will tell. Now, I wanted to jump up and go get up north to the Ukraine. Look, the conflict from a bird's eye view appears stagnant. However, and what I mean by bird's eye view, a mainstream media eye view here in the United States, it is not stagnant. The Russians are fighting a war of attrition designed to degrade and destroy the Ukrainian military. I've talked about this before. The Russians are continuing to advance. They are continuing to take cities. They are continuing, I believe, to cause more casualties to the Ukrainians than the Russians are actually taking themselves. The mainstream media would have you believe that the Ukrainians, while losing territory and pulling back, are causing the Russians to take a lot of casualties. And the hope is, at least the hope for the uninformed urbanite and the mainstream media, is that eventually that the Russians will wear down. That's not what is happening. The Russians have a strategy, and they are utilizing that strategy to defeat the Ukrainian military. Is it a long strategy? Is it a strategy that, say, is not indicative of what maybe a country like the United States would offer up? Yes, probably, yes, absolutely. The doctrine, the capability, the technology is different. While at the same time, the Ukrainians are being provided to an immense amount of technology, money, treasure, weapon systems, and technology to fight the Russians. But the Russians are doing the one thing that they know that they can do to defeat completely the Ukrainian threat, and that's killing Ukrainians on a scale that eventually the Ukrainians will capitulate. Eventually, we'll get to the point of no return, and we will see the Ukrainian military collapse. It is going to collapse eventually. It's just a matter of when. Just a matter of when. One other subject I want to jump on real quick is what is happening in the Horn of Africa, the former state of Ethiopia, led by the dictator Abiy Ahmed and his pro-Abiy forces. Look, the Ethiopian pro-Abiy military is now 500,000 and has been 500,000 in strength for quite some time. They have been eyeing a seaport in Eritrea, this country here, and then obviously tensions continue to exist between Tigray and Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed wants a lot of things, and the enemy of my enemy can very quickly become my friend in this area of the world. At one point, obviously, even though they share the same language, Eritrea, the Eritreans, and the Tigrayans. At one point, just a couple of years ago, they were at each other's throats. And now they may be getting in bed together to face off against Abiy Ahmed. But we'll see what happens there. Things are definitely on the course for another very large civil war that could break out. Not only a civil war, a war between the Abiy loyalist forces taking on the Tigrayan defense forces, and quite possibly the army of Eritrea as well. So things are definitely worth watching there. We will continue to watch what is happening there as well, and bring you information as we are able to get it. Again, very difficult to get information from that part of the world, especially considering what is happening. But it was nice to talk with everybody today. As always, thank you for joining us. More to come. Have a good day.